In late July 1881, the arrest of Patrick Slattery from Bodyke, County Clare, carried a particular chill. Slattery was not seized in the aftermath of a riot, nor was he caught in the act of violence. He was arrested under the provisions of what became known as the Coercion Act. The Lord Lieutenant of Ireland needed only to issue a warrant, and the police could detain anyone without trial. What made the arrest remarkable and deeply unsettling was that Slattery had recently appeared as a key witness at a coroner's inquest. He identified a member of the Irish Constabulary as having struck the fatal blow that killed a local farmer. Within days, the witness himself was in prison. He too was detained without trial. When an Irish MP asked in the House of Commons whether arresting a witness was intended to encourage the giving of evidence in Ireland, the question went unanswered. The arrest of Patrick Slattery captured the essence of political repression in 1880s Ireland. The Coercion Act of 1881 was presented by the British government as a necessary response to disorder during the Land War. In practice, it blurred the line between criminal justice and political repression. It allowed the Irish executive to imprison individuals not for what they had been convicted of doing, but for what they were suspected of representing. The background to the Coercion Act lay in the deep agrarian crisis of the late 1870s and early 1880s. Agricultural prices had fallen, rent arrears mounted, evictions resumed. Across rural Ireland, communities were pushed to the brink. In many districts, landlords were systematically driving tenant farmers into homelessness and abject poverty. The Irish National Land League organised resistance through rent strikes, mass meetings, and the social ostracism of landlords and agents. Violence did occur, but much of the agitation was collective, disciplined, and political rather than criminal. To Dublin Castle officials and to ministers in London, this refusal to cooperate with landlords, police, and courts appeared to signal something more serious. A breakdown of authority that the regular legal system could no longer manage. It was William Ewart Gladstone's so-called Liberal government that introduced the Protection of Person and Property Act in March 1881. This fact shocked many contemporaries. Gladstone was pursuing sweeping land reform, yet at the same time he suspended core civil liberties in Ireland. The Act empowered the Lord Lieutenant to arrest and detain anyone reasonably suspected of involvement in agrarian crime or intimidation. Habeas corpus was effectively suspended. Detainees were not charged, tried, or convicted. They were simply removed from circulation. The British administration did not hold back. The provisions of the Act were used extensively. During its peak in 1881 and 1882, more than 1,000 men were imprisoned without trial. Entire local branches of the Land League were dismantled through coordinated arrests. Leading nationalist figures, including Charles Stewart Parnell, leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party in the House of Commons, were detained alongside local organisers, labourers, and tenants. The geography of coercion followed the geography of distress. Counties such as Clare, Mayo, Galway, and Cork, where evictions were most common, also experienced the heaviest enforcement. The case of Patrick Slattery illustrates how the Coercion Act functioned at ground level. On June 1st, 1881, tensions in Bodyke boiled over. A local landlord, Colonel John O'Callaghan, was determined to enforce rent payments on his estate. He arrived in the village accompanied by around 150 Royal Irish Constabulary officers and bailiffs, intent on serving writs on 26 tenants for non-payment of rent. Many of the police were carrying rifles. They acted less like public servants keeping the peace, and more like an occupying force. Word of the armed arrival spread quickly. A large crowd of locals, organised by the Land League and armed mainly with sticks and stones, gathered to resist. Barriers were erected, the process servers were pelted with missiles, an initial retreat followed. The situation escalated when County Inspector Brownrigg ordered his men to charge. Police advanced with batons drawn and bayonets fixed, striking indiscriminately at the crowd. Amid the chaos, gunfire erupted. Accounts differ as to who fired first. Official reports claimed the police were attacked, that the inspector's horse was killed, and that several officers were wounded. In the melee, local farmer John Maloney of Cahir Hurley was struck twice on the head with the butt of a rifle by Sub-Constable O'Grady. Maloney died the following morning. In the aftermath, 22 unarmed locals were arrested. They were handcuffed in pairs and subjected to deliberate humiliation. Their braces and trouser buttons were cut, forcing them to hold up their trousers. Their shoelaces were severed to prevent escape. They were marched to prison in this state while eviction notices were served on their neighbors. Slattery, a returned emigrant and naturalized American citizen who had witnessed the clash, testified at the inquest. He directly implicated Constable O'Grady in Mahoney's death. On 25th of July, Slattery himself was arrested under the Coercion Act on reasonable suspicion of riot and shooting with intent to murder. The timing was striking. His detention came only days after his damning evidence against a constable in a fatal assault. British authorities attempted to remove the problem by offering to release him if he agreed to leave Ireland immediately and return to America. Slattery refused. He chose to remain. He was detained without trial in Limerick prison for over a year until his unconditional release on the 1st of August 1882. To many in Ireland, the message was unmistakable. Those who challenged official authority, even if the challenge amounted to nothing more than lawful testimony in a court, could be silenced by administrative power. Coercion was not simply about suppressing violence. It was about controlling narratives, witnesses, and political mobilization. Measured narrowly, the Coercion Act achieved some success. Recorded agrarian crime declined. Public meetings were curtailed. Local resistance was temporarily disrupted. From the perspective of the authorities, the act restored a measure of order and demonstrated that the state retained the upper hand. But this effectiveness was shallow and fleeting. The act addressed none of the structural causes of unrest: high rents, insecure tenure, and rural poverty. When arrests slowed, agitation returned. More importantly, coercion proved politically corrosive. By imprisoning men without trial, including witnesses and constitutional leaders, the government undermined confidence in the rule of law itself. In the public mind, the distinction between crime and protest collapsed. Irish reaction was overwhelmingly hostile. Even those uneasy about Land League tactics recoiled at imprisonment without trial. The law was widely regarded as colonial, acceptable for Ireland, unthinkable in Britain. Communities rallied around prisoners' families. Newspapers framed detainees as victims of injustice. Resentment toward the police deepened. Rather than isolating agitators, coercion often bound them more tightly to popular sympathy. The clergy, though cautious about violence, were deeply uneasy about the suspension of civil liberties. Many priests criticized the Coercion Act openly, adding moral authority to popular opposition. Far from pacifying Ireland, coercion intensified distrust and hardened attitudes toward British rule. The Coercion Act of 1881 stands as a case study in the limits of governing through emergency power. It suppressed disorder in the short term, but at the cost of legitimacy. The arrest of Patrick Slattery, witness turned long-term prisoner, convinced many Irish people that legal safeguards would always be set aside when ordinary people challenged the power of landlords. The Act may have restored order on paper, but it deepened the conviction that Ireland was governed not by the rule of law, but by repression.